quickly than we do. Yeah. So I'm really excited to share with you guys. My name's Sarah. As Alan said, I have been leading Monday night worship with my friend Forrest for like 5.5 years now, and we just moved into AMP on Monday nights. So I've been getting to know James a little better, and him and Mark are letting me share with you. I feel really honored. I haven't actually ever shared kind of what I'm going to talk to you guys about corporately, really. I've talked to many people about it, and it was just a really difficult season in my life. So I'm really excited that I feel like the Lord's kind of finally let me write it down in something that I hope is cohesive that I can share with you and hopefully give you tools if you ever find yourself in a season where you feel really hidden. So basically, I am going to talk to you guys about when you feel really hidden. Maybe people don't understand where you're at. Maybe you feel like the Lord's kind of pulled you like towards himself and other people are unavailable to comfort you. Maybe you just felt like, I don't know, like no one could see you all of a sudden, even though you were still in community. So I just want to tell you a few of the tools that I learned and kind of gained through this time. Typically, when I'm talking to Jesus, I have two main focuses, and you'll probably hear them every single time I talk or pray up here. But when we're talking, I usually spend most of my time thanking him because I've kind of found that thanking him gives me more of a return than asking for things. Typically, I thank him for what he's doing or what he will do, for his promises, and then definitely for the people around me. I feel like that's kind of like my automatic. As soon as I lay down in bed at night, I just automatically start thanking him for people. And that's something that I've always, instead of coming to him feeling like I'm in a place of need, I always leave with peace of heart, even if I don't have the answer I was hoping for. And the second thing that I love talking to him about is growth. So I always have so many growth opportunities in my life, and I love pursuing learning and just growing in every area I can find. I'm not afraid to grow, and I really look for opportunities to do that. So that sounds really noble probably, but actually I usually end up praying those things because I've made a mess somewhere along the way in a relationship or situation, and I'm like, okay, I need to backtrack and figure out what just happened, and I need to find a better way to respond in the future. So usually when those things happen, I like to refer to them as exciting growth opportunities, usually a little tongue-in-cheek, and I'm probably rolling my eyes when it happens. But this piece of my journey was definitely an exciting growth opportunity, and I had so much growth come out of it. It happened when I moved back to Maui in 2012, and I had been at Bethel for 2 years. I came with very specific expectations of what would happen, and things went the exact opposite of what I've hoped. If you've lived on Maui for any amount of time, you're probably like, oh yeah, that sounds right. So I came into the season that was literally the most difficult I had ever faced, and I would honestly go through it all again just for the things that I learned and gained during that time, which is obviously easier to say after the fact, maybe not in the midst of it. But I can say that now, so I'm excited to kind of share some of that with you guys. And the first thing you need to know to understand this story is that I really love stability, and I really like planning things out. And my favorite thing is when what I planned happens. So this was not my favorite thing because none of those things happened. The first months I moved back, as you guys know, it's really hard to find two things here, housing and a car. So if you found those really easily, you have to know that's amazing because it usually doesn't happen like that. When I moved back, I kind of couch surfed with friends for maybe like a month, which is really hard for me. Again, I just want to know where I'm going to live, and I want to know that I have a car, because if I at least have a car, I could basically live in there, I guess. So I moved in with two girls I didn't know, and they were Christians. They were amazing. I just didn't know them, so I felt kind of alone, a little nervous. I had been looking for a car for I want to say 4 to 5 weeks. I test drove a lot of cars. I had cash. I was ready. There was no problem. I could buy a decent car. And I just went back and forth with so many people, and nothing ever worked out, which seemed really strange. I ended up just walking to work at the surf school. I would take the bus everywhere else, and I just didn't really know anyone on island yet, and then not having a car made it really hard to find anyone. My best friend was moving back, but it wasn't for like a month away. So I was kind of just spending most of my time alone, except on Friday nights at Hope Chapel, where I would see some of my friends. So finally I broke down and I just went to a dealership and bought a car. So I was like, I don't have time to play with Craigslist anymore. Like, I literally need a car. And the day after I bought this car, I finally feel like I have some stability in my life. I have a house, I have a car. The relationship that I was in ended. So I had been putting a lot of eggs in this relationship basket that I was hoping would end in marriage, which ended up obviously not. So I just felt so trapped on Maui all of a sudden. I was like, okay, so my best friend isn't here. I could barely see the people I do know, and then everyone kind of knows me from this other person. So I have to reestablish who I am in this place where I don't know where to go or who to talk to, or I don't even know the people I live with, basically. It was an intense time, but this was one of those times when I was like, okay, I have a really exciting growth opportunity right now, and I can choose to drift along in self-pity, which I did for just a hot minute, or I can decide that I'm going to grow from this and get as much out of it as I can. Especially if something's really hard, you might as well get awesome stuff from it, right? Instead of just thinking back how much that time was horrible. So I think the most painful realization I had after that relationship ended and everything, I kind of felt trapped because I bought that car, right? So I wanted to leave Island, honestly. I was just like, I'll just leave and I'll go, ? I had no idea where I would go. So it's probably good that I had a car because I felt I can't leave because now I have this car. I'm not going to ditch it. It took me like 4 or 5 weeks to find it. So I just realized I had to stay here and just figure it out. So I realized that when I started spending more time alone, that I had no idea who I was anymore. I had kind of just let pieces of myself slip away because I was trying to conform to what was happening around me, trying to fit in. I wasn't really pushing into the things I was passionate about, so I kind of lost myself. When I was at Bethel, I did 1 year in BSSM, and then I spent 1 year just attending church and living in community. And it was awesome, but it's really easy to get lost in the crowd there. It's really easy to just kind of coast on what's happening corporately, which is awesome, but you don't notice what's happening inside yourself. So I kind of had my theology completely reworked compared to my Baptist upbringing while I was there. And I had so much internal change that I hadn't really focused on what was happening, which was losing pieces of myself. So when I came back to Maui and I was just feeling really lost and alone, it was the perfect time, actually, for me to find out who I was, which was really cool because I had never sat down and thought about who am I even? Like, who do I even want to be? And who does God say I am? I mean, I had so many prophetic words, but you don't always sit down and think about, where is this taking me? What does this actually mean? Like, what are the consequences of what God says about me? So it was a really cool time because it's amazing what he can do in your heart when it's been broken, you feel trapped and alone. There's nowhere else to go, and sometimes he has to get you in that place so that he can radically change everything for you. Not to say that he caused any of those things to happen. Those were my own choices, but it's really cool if you let him, and you can be uncomfortable for some time. He will completely change everything that you understand about him and yourself, which is what he did. So I feel like whenever I'm about to share the story, and it's mostly been personally, but I want to kind of avoid the situation and circumstances that led up to it, which has made me realize we avoid the unpleasant parts of our journey because we want to feel acceptable to people. We want to look like everything's okay, like have everything together. It's totally fine. And when we do that, I think we really miss out on the pieces of who we really are, because in those situations we have a choice to be ashamed and hide them from the world, but we actually make decisions that shape our future in those times. So we have to be okay with those parts of our story and be okay sharing them. And it can take time, and you have to have wisdom when and how you share it. But I just when I look back at it now, I think of what a beautiful time it was because of how much I gained in my understanding of the Father. I'm actually having deja vu right now of him showing me that he's been preparing me to share this, so that's cool. So hiddenness is kind of a crazy thing, and many people were hidden in the Bible, and they felt unappreciated, or God pulled them aside. I mean, I can think of so many people. Moses is in the desert by himself, walking around. David, which I want to talk about in a moment, but it's crazy we can feel alone when we're surrounded by people. And in the times that I've needed people the most, they've been extremely unavailable. Have you ever had a time where you're like, I just really need to talk to someone? So you call like your top 5 people and no one answers. And you're like, that's weird. Are they all hanging out without me? What? No one's answering your text messages. They're not showing up at like the weekly events they normally would. One of my friends was out of the country that I really wanted to talk to, and it was really frustrating. But that's when you only have God, and he's the one who's like, I need to speak truth to you. I need you to stop trying to get validation from other people and listen to what I have to say, even if it's uncomfortable. But it's in this place when we actually find out who we are and what we really believe. This is where we grow the most. It's this vulnerability of exposing everything about ourselves to the Father and accepting that we're fully known and cherished, which is really hard when you feel like you've failed to be fully known and accept that he actually loves and cherishes you in that place. It was an intense intimacy, but I actually miss the times that I would spend with a father. I don't miss the situations, but it's crazy how intimate my quiet time with him was. I would spend like a couple hours each morning before going to work just sitting and journaling and listening, and I can't even put into words so many of the things that he shared with me, but I had this time to think about all the things I had been learning about him at Bethel and find out if I actually believed that in action. Because you can say you believe so many things until you actually have to test it out, and then you might find out you don't believe that at all. But it's easy to say, I do believe that, and then in secret, you don't. So when he was showing me all these things, so many Bible verses I'd been hearing for years just became incredibly real to me, and I think sometimes that's kind of how he makes it. You can read it and agree with it, and then when you're in the place, you're like, oh yeah, he is close to the brokenhearted. He really did mean that. Like that's actually real. And that closeness was the only thing that kept me pushing through, because so many times on the boring days when there's nothing eventful happening, it's really easy to want to just escape with mindless whatever. It could be social media, it could just be talking to people and avoiding this pain that you could be sitting in and confronting. Even though it's uncomfortable, if you confront it, you won't have to worry about it later. Like, that's the biggest thing I learned. I had pushed pain down so many times and missed out on so many growth opportunities because I just shoved it down or ran away from it. And in this time, I was like, I'm not going to do that this time. And now when I think about this situation, I don't have to have pain anymore, which is amazing. I mean, it's also like 5 years later, but it's really cool that you can look back and think, well, that was unfortunate. I see the decisions I made that weren't the best, and now I know that I can move forward and do something much better in the future. The biggest challenge I faced was sitting in that uncomfortable time, and I definitely got new meaning to the verse in James chapter 1. You probably all know it. Consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. It sounds, you kind of like roll your eyes when you read it if you don't need it at that time. You're like, joy, that's not, why would you find joy in trials? That's kind of impossible. But I actually want to read the Passion Translation because it's really good. My fellow believers, when it seems as though you're facing nothing but difficulties, see it as an invaluable opportunity to experience the greatest joy you can. For you know that when your faith is tested, it stirs up power within you to endure all things. So it's really cool that when your faith is tested, power is actually being stirred up within you. And that will allow you to endure all things. And then as your endurance grows even stronger, which it can in every single trial you face, you can literally gain something, which it looks like you can gain joy, your faith's being tested, power's being stirred up. Your endurance grows even stronger, and it will release perfection into every part of your being until there's nothing missing and nothing lacking. So I kind of had this new realization that if I can push through this and power can rise up in me, through him, and I can gain endurance, then there'll be nothing missing and nothing lacking. I'm just in this process of perfection, and I kind of saw my relationship with him in a different way, that I wasn't trying to get to some end goal, which I used to think I'm just trying to get to like this perfect version he has of me, but I'm actually the learning process about us learning about each other through these things was the real relationship. And it's easy to say that, and then when you actually get to test that out, it's a really cool thing because he's so faithful and he's so sturdy and he's so comforting in those times. perfecting the process. So part of perfecting the process for me was refocusing my core values. So this is like the biggest thing. The biggest decision that I made during this time was deciding who I wanted to be. And the way that I did that was I just decided I'm going to write down a list of this person that I want to be, and then I'm going to do whatever it takes to become that person on the list. So I can't even remember all of them now, but it was like probably a page long, and I decided I'm going to read this every single day until I have it memorized. And then every time I have a decision to make, I'm going to take out my list, and I'm going to look at it, and I'm going to see if this decision is going to take me towards this person I want to be or away from. And I did that with the smallest decisions, and maybe I did it a little too much, got a little legalistic about it, but doing that, even when I didn't feel like it, completely changed who I was. Like, it was amazing because that list it just always seemed so unattainable to me. Like, oh, this idea of who I wish I was in my head, I'll never be able to get there. And then God just showed me, if you're just faithful to what I've called you to, even when you don't feel like it, especially when you don't feel like it, you'll find out later that you've become that person along the way. And that's exactly what happened. It was amazing. So before I would make those decisions, I'd pull out my list. A lot of them were simple decisions based on how I would spend my time or how I would spend my money or who I would spend time with, things I would watch, etc. One of the prophetic words I had gotten many years before that was that I would be speaking on stage. And when I would hear that, I would get really scared because that sounds terrifying. Everyone is afraid of public speaking. And there were years between hearing the word that I would speak on stage and actually ever being on a stage. And so it's just funny that I'm getting to talk to you here today, but it's interesting because one of the lies I'd always believed about myself was what I had to say wasn't as important as what other people had to say. So if you're called to speak, that's really scary because how could you speak when someone else could share something better than you? So I remember when we first started worship night in someone's house, and Forrest and I at first, we would never actually talk at worship night. Someone would grab a guitar and we would just play worship for 3 hours. And then eventually we realized we had to take a little ownership over it to continue to steward something we wanted to continue. And I was just so afraid to even share like the simplest things that I felt like God told me in front of a group smaller than this of my friends. Like I couldn't. It was crazy. Like, I just felt like I couldn't even open my mouth physically. Like, I couldn't speak every single time. And I remember one Monday night, I felt like I had something to share, and I was like, okay, I'm going to share. And so what I would usually do is I'd be like, okay, I'm going to share. In my head, and I was like, I'm going to count to 10 in my head. And if no one else talks, then it means I'm supposed to talk. And I would count to 10 real slow. So, because it'd be silent, and someone would just be strumming. And I'd be like, okay, 10. 9, anyone's going to talk? And I would somehow, if I got to 1, I would always convince myself, you don't need to, the moment's passed. Like, it's, oh no, they started playing a song, now I can't interrupt them. That'd be awkward every time. And I just remember this night, the Lord was like, why do you think what I've told someone else is more important than what I've told you? Because I told you both something, so it's not you making it up, it's something I said, so why is it more important if they share? And I realized, wow, I'm actually holding people back from hearing what God has to say to them because I won't just open my mouth and be obedient. It had nothing to do with me. It was just him saying, I told you this so that they would hear it from you, and that would impact them. And so from then on, I used one of those core values, those things that I had written down, which was I won't let fear make decisions for me. So I decided I'm going to say yes anytime someone asks me to speak, whether it's on stage or I got opportunities in classrooms or just in front of small groups. I was like, I'm just going to say yes, no matter what the topic is. If they say, hey, can you share on this? I'll say, sure. And I did, and it was terrifying. Every time I said yes, I was so scared, and then I was basically having a panic attack until I got on stage. And and every time I was so scared, but once I got the mic and I started talking, which is what he's always told me when he gives me prophetic words or tells me to share, he's like, I won't tell you the rest until you start talking. He's like, first start talking, and then the rest will come, because he's like, I want to see if you're going to take that first step. So that's what would happen every time, and it was amazing when I stopped letting fear make that decision for me. Oh, so processing all that pain and reestablishing my identity, it took me an entire year. And it wasn't until I looked back that I could see how far I had come, and that I could see that my entire identity was changed. And if you ask people that knew me, like when I was at Bethel, they would tell you I was a completely different person. And it's cool because when I went to Bethel, I became a completely different person from the person I was before that as well. So there was all this change that led to where I'm at now. And when I look back, I'm like, wow, I'm so thankful even for all those things that I didn't run away from, because I chose to face anything that was difficult, which was another one of my values. I won't run away from adversity. It completely changed everything. And now when I'm in those places, I can look at it as a challenge. And I'm like, okay, I wonder what I can learn from this. It's not always that exciting. I don't always feel that excited about it, but I can look at it and say, I know I'm going to gain something from this. And the endurance that I gain from this is going to move me towards perfection, where there will be nothing lacking and nothing missing. So I could have never imagined being on stage when I was so afraid to speak, even in front of my friends. But now that I know that the Father's always moving us towards a better version of ourselves, and that version looks more like Jesus, and that he's not in a rush to get us there, it's so much less scary just doing the boring days with him. And I know John isn't here today, but what he shared last week about when we read the Bible and we see the stories of the disciples, we're just seeing their highlight reels. We're seeing such a small part of their lives, so we can't expect to do something crazy, amazing every single day. We'll have plenty of days like that, but the boring days, those are the days that set you up for success on the crazy, amazing days. Like, you can't even get to those days unless you can be faithful in those small things. Now, there's a parallel I want to draw between my life and the life of my favorite Bible character. And I in no way want to say that my experience was comparable to his, okay? But he also went through a season of hiddenness, loneliness, and then reestablishing his identity. And because there's often a gap in between receiving the word and when we actually get to the thing, it can be really frustrating in the in-between. So David was anointed as a king, as a young man. He had the anointing of the prophet and of the Lord. And he was not ushered directly to the throne. He had a lot of maturing to do, and he had already spent so much time being hidden. He understood 100% what being hidden was. He was basically like the forgotten about child who just had to hang out on the pasture with his father's sheep. And it was the same for me, just feeling hidden and feeling like no one even, I'm kind of forgotten about. Like, no one remembers or even knows what I'm going through, and I'm just kind of out here I didn't even have any sheep with me, so it wasn't as fun maybe as he had. I didn't have a slingshot either. But it was really cool because the only way that God can address those things is if he gets you in that place, and you have to let him as well. So David had to begin to act like a king before he actually was on the throne. So it's kind of a dress for the job you want, not the job you have scenario. And instead of his life improving, it got a million times worse before he even made it to the throne. And this was a huge growth opportunity for him. He had to mature even more than he already had. Because he chose to spend time with God in the pasture, he already had some maturity of heart, and that's why he was chosen. But God was like, I've taught you all of this in isolation, so what are you going to do when you're in the palace and you have all these decisions to make that other people are involved in? If no one else is involved, it's really easy to make decisions. But once other people are involved, it gets real complicated really fast. So he gets into the palace, but not to take the throne. He has to serve King Saul, and we all know all of the story. The Lord had already removed his spirit from Saul. David's been anointed, so legally he has the throne, but he instead serves Saul. And it must be strange to see this throne that's supposed to be yours, and you have no idea how you're going to get there. You're like, well, this guy's still the king, so this is confusing because I was told I was supposed to be the king. And one thing that was said of David at least 3 times during his time in the palace was that he behaved wisely. So when I see that, it makes me think that God felt all the things he had been teaching David were actually happening. So David was like, I can take all these things and translate them to life in the palace. In 1 Samuel 18:5, it says, So David went out wherever Saul sent him and behaved wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So that's quite a promotion from being a shepherd to being in charge of an army. Because I'm guessing sheep don't really behave like an army. I don't really know much about sheep, but I think they don't. So David seems to have gained so much favor in Saul's eyes and the eyes of the servants and the people. And that kind of starts to make Saul upset, as we know. He sends David out to war. David keeps coming back successful. People are making up songs that he's better than Saul, and he gets really mad. And so during this time, when Saul has the Spirit of the Lord lifted, he has this distressing spirit come. He invites David to play worship for him, and that helps soothe him. So David's playing his instrument, I forget what it was, and Saul decides he's going to try to kill him now. So he throws a spear at him while he's just playing worship, which I always wonder what David's thinking. He's just probably casually playing worship, and then someone tries to kill him. Can't imagine what that would be like. So I don't know what's going on in David's head, but Saul decides, okay, well, I missed him, so I'm going to send him out to war against the Philistines because he'll probably die in battle. Unfortunately, he doesn't die for Saul's sake, and he gets the reward of marrying Saul's daughter, which makes Saul even more angry. And in 1 Samuel 18, it says, "And David behaved wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Therefore, when Saul saw that he behaved wisely, he was afraid of him. But all of Israel and Judah loved David." So that must have made Saul extremely upset, that the whole kingdom loves him, and he's trying to get rid of him. So this is where things start unraveling. Saul puts him... Saul... Let's see, where am I? So after the first attempt at his life with a spear, the next time David comes and is playing worship for him, he tries to kill him again, which I don't know why you'd go back after the first time, because a lot of people, when they're playing worship, close their eyes. So I feel like you probably couldn't do that because you might get a spear. He avoids the spear again because of the Lord, and this time he has to run because Saul's definitely going to kill him. And when he leaves, I think one thing that's interesting is that he leaves alone. So he was a really popular guy. He probably could have left with a crowd. He's a giant killer. I'm sure women were just throwing themselves at him. He's leading people into battle, but he decides to go alone. And it's in this alone time when he has no sheep. I don't know if he has a slingshot still, but he's just running for his life, being chased by Saul. I don't know exactly how long. I want to say it's probably 1 to 2 years, long enough to be chased by someone who's trying to kill you when you're by yourself. But this is the time when now what he's learned in the palace has to again translate back to, what do I believe about God when I'm by myself? When I'm in this cave and I'm by myself, everyone's trying to kill me. He eventually gets a small army of rejects, but even they aren't really super listening to him, and he didn't ever say he wanted to lead them. They just keep following him around. And during this time, he writes some of the most well-known psalms, and it's cool that out of his darkest time comes some of the brightest treasures for all of us, and that we get to treasure those things in our darkest times. And just this one thing makes me realize why we need to share parts of our story, because sometimes I think, well, I don't want to share like certain things because it's just talking too much about myself, but other people can gain things just from you talking about how you move through something successfully. So I think it's really cool that he just bears his heart to the Lord, and he grew because he wrestled with God about all these things that were happening to him. He wasn't just sitting there like, okay, these are my circumstances. He wrestled, and he would cry out to God and say, why are you doing this? Why did you leave me? Like, what is even happening? Why am I here? You told me these things, and now all these people are against me. I don't even know what to do. And it's just really cool because he has to relearn again, like, who am I when I'm by myself? Because he's gotten all this fame in the palace after being a little shepherd boy. So God's like, okay, let's just make sure that stuff's really in there. If Saul's going to chase you, I can use this time to make sure that you're really ready. I can mature your heart and your character. So when you do take the throne, you're going to be a good king. Because, again, Saul's the first king, and the Lord was like, I don't want to give you a king. He's going to destroy you. And the people were like, I don't care. We want a king anyway. And so that's where they're at. So he's like, I want to make sure the next king is ideal, and that I've trained this person myself. One thing I really liked about David during this time is that he refused to promote himself. He has the legal right to the throne, but he refuses to promote himself. He could have killed Saul multiple times, but he refuses. Even his little reject army suggests when they're in his camp, they're like, oh, just kill him. Like, if you just kill him now, we'll be done with this. And he was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And he actually says, who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As the Lord lives, the Lord shall strike him, or his day will come to die, or he will go out in battle and perish. So he has no idea still how he's getting to the throne. He's just like, I know it's not while Saul's alive, so I'll just hang out until something happens. And when we read David's story now, we know that there's this time before he was king and then when he became king. And it's the same for all of us. There's a time before we are actually establishing our identity and establishing what we believe about him, and after. It was his destiny long before he sat on the throne, and I used to think that when we got a prophetic word and there was such a long delay, it just meant that we weren't good enough. And by we, I mean myself. I was like, it just means that I'm not good enough yet. But actually, it's the Lord saying in his kindness, he's like, I haven't given you all the tools. You haven't worked out certain things. So it's not that you're not good enough. It's that I'm going to make sure you're ready before I put you there. Because if I told you you're going to go there, you're going to have everything you need to succeed. So if I put you there too soon, you're not going to succeed. And then you're going to look at me and be like, why did you put me here? This actually destroyed me. Yeah, there's so many different things that I learned, and it blows my mind, all the things we don't realize about God until we have to. So I just think a lot of the times God gives us these opportunities to strengthen our character, and we miss out on them because they look a lot like problems or betrayals or painful times in relationships or all kinds of things. And our entire lives are actually just this adventure of becoming more who he made us to be. This is one of my favorite things to think about because there's so many verses, and they just kind of always lead me in this never-ending circle that he sees us as he created us, because we're seated in heavenly places. So he sees us as completed, but he also walks with us on our journey to completion. And then he's also in the heavenlies praying for us to become completed, even though he sees us as completed. And he's moving us to look more like himself, even though when he sees us, he sees himself. It's really confusing, but I just think it's really cool that what he's called us to, he already sees us as, and he walks with us as we get there. And that's been something that I can never really get away from, just thinking he's making me look more like him, and it's more simple and more complex than I ever realized. And it's just a beautiful thing, and I feel like God could change so many things for us in an instant, but like I said, in his wisdom, he doesn't. He teaches us through relationship with him, and it's never a punishment. It's never holding us back. It's always empowering us to be what he said we would be. And it's just amazing. So I think he reveals how important character is to him when he anoints David over all his brothers. Because even Samuel, the anointed prophet, wants to pick the best-looking guy. He's like, this guy's good-looking, let's pick him. He seems cool, the oldest son, perfect. But God says, no, I want someone whose heart has been prepared for this task. So when we're in those places of feeling hidden or feeling like we're working through this stuff and really, really wrestling with God, we get the opportunity to be transparent with him with what we think about him. We get the opportunity to say, I believe you're good, but it doesn't feel like your goodness right here, so what's happening? And letting him speak truth to it. Because he has no need to prove himself, but he always will because he loves us. That's the only reason. He doesn't need to. He's like, I am faithful, and you need to understand that in this situation, so I'm going to show you for you right now what faithfulness would look like to you. I'm going to do that for you because he's good and he is faithful. Yeah. So I just feel like when we're able to face adversity head on, we can trust that that journey is safe. We can trust that he's taking us into a safe place just because he's with us, not because the actual destination is safe. But that's the safest place for us to actually be, which is really cool. I've learned so much from that time, and even getting to practice those things I've learned since then, because again, he'll teach you, and then he gives you the opportunity to test it out, to show that he's like, I taught you this, I'm faithful, it's going to work, but you have to lean on me and trust me to make it happen. And as I've made that a priority in my life, I've had times when I've wanted to be really angry at people that have hurt me, and when I start feeling that rise up in myself, all of a sudden my spirit will speak to me and just say, we've actually already forgiven that person, so we don't have to feel angry anymore. And that wasn't I forgave someone one time, because that almost never works, but it was me faithfully choosing, I'm going to forgive people until it stops hurting. You know what I mean? I don't have to restore a relationship or whatever, but when that thought comes up and I'm like, oh, that person, no, all of a sudden my spirit's like, actually, Jesus thinks this about them, and you're not mad at them anymore. So don't try to force yourself to be mad at them. And that is probably one of the coolest things that's come out of that too. It's just having yourself work through things on the boring days and then finding out a year later it actually worked when you thought nothing was happening. That's something I still lean on, that I just work through things even if I feel nothing. Yeah. So I guess the things that I want to leave with you guys today is that a lot of times Jesus looks at success differently than us, and sometimes it looks like we've failed to everyone around us and even to ourselves. And just outwardly, it's like, well, that's a clear failure. And the Lord's like, actually, no, you were obedient. You did what you knew to do, and I'm proud of you. And now I can turn that into a success, even if it didn't end the way you think it would. I actually had a better ending for you, and so we just had to get rid of that so we can get to this better thing. And it's hard because we can't see that. So that's where we get to practice our faithfulness and leaning in his goodness, even when it doesn't look good. And yeah, just those choices we make in the difficult times, those things literally shape what our future will look like. You know, like if you choose to not run away when something's hard, the next time you face something hard, it's not going to be as hard. It doesn't mean you won't face hard things. It just means you're going to know what to do, and you'll get to lean into his goodness. So one of the things I wanted to do with you guys today was that list of things that I made for myself. I would encourage all of you to do that another time, but just to write down like things that you really value and kind of look at it, and don't let yourself feel like shamed or feel guilt that you're not this person you want to be, but just ask yourself, what decisions can I start making to be more like this? So one thing I wanted to do was to be kind even when people weren't kind to me. So we get opportunities to do that pretty much every day, especially driving, really easy. And no one knows what choice you made, which is the worst, because you want someone to be like, oh, good job. So you have to make those choices when you're by yourself, right? But just looking at those things that you want to move towards, and know that the Father's on your side. He wants you to move there too. He's not in some sort of rush to get you there. He's not looking at you thinking, I wish you would hurry up, or I wish we didn't have to keep doing this thing over and over. He's like, no, you're doing great. Good job. I'm so proud of you. You're still moving forward. I'm with you. Like, we're going to get there. There's no time. He's not in time, so he's not really concerned about it. He's like, you're going to get it, whether it's here or whether it's in heaven, so let's just keep moving forward, you know? So I made that list. And like I said, you should definitely look that over when you get home. But I would ask myself a couple questions each day to make sure that I wasn't avoiding facing pain, or I wasn't running away from this like place that I was in until it was time. I chose, because I saw like how David refused to promote himself before it was time. He didn't try to force himself into his destiny, which he could have done. He chose to face what God was putting in front of him and just walking through it. So I would ask myself a couple questions. You guys can steal these from me, or you could also just make up your own, whatever you want to do. And it's really cool to also ask someone else these questions that's maybe also trying to hold themselves accountable. But the first one was, what did you meditate or think about today? And it was cool because Forrest and I would ask each other these questions when we would see each other Friday night at Hope Chapel. And it's just nice to like talk with someone else about it to see where they're at. But for me, I often get stuck in like trains of thought that just never end, and they're not usually positive ones. So I would have to ask myself, hey, did you get stuck in one of those today? And then I would also ask myself, what did thinking about that do to your day? Like, was your day feeling amazing after you went on this really long thought train that was really negative? Did you feel great, or did you feel anxiety? Same thing with like social media. If I spend too much time on social media, my mood is just going down. Like, I don't see very many positive things there, so I know before I go to bed, probably shouldn't be looking at it. When I wake up in the morning, not the best way to start my day. The next question I would ask myself is, what did you do to move towards greatness? So every day we have this choice to move forward, especially on the boring days. And it can be the smallest thing, because like John was talking about last week, we're not going to do some crazy thing every single day, and we'd probably get really worn out if we did. So we have the small choices, and for me, I would think, okay, where's my mind going today? And if I felt like my mind was going somewhere I shouldn't be going, I would just say no, and then I would just change. And it took me a long time to rewire my mind to not think about certain situations the way that I had been thinking about them, and just stopping myself, picking something new, even if it was basic or even if it was unicorns. I was like, I'm just going to think about something different than where I'm going. The third question I'd ask myself is, were you believing any lies today? Most days I was, so it was pretty easy to answer. And then I would ask myself, what did you do about those? And that was just like I was saying, like, am I going to continue thinking this thing about myself that's not true, or am I going to declare God's truth over it? So the first thing I would do is I'd go to the Word, or I would just pray over myself, declare over myself. If I couldn't get out of it and I was in some sort of funk, I would just call a friend and be like, hey, I'm just feeling really weird about this today, and I just think this is never going to happen, or whatever. And then my friend would say, actually, that's not true. We already know that's not true because this has been prayed over you, or the Lord actually says that he's going to work all things out for your good. And sometimes you need someone else to just pull you out of those thoughts. And the very last thing I would ask myself is, what did Holy Spirit tell you today? And that is a really good one, because it can take over everything else that you thought about. Anything that was negative, you can remind yourself, no, this is what Holy Spirit said to me today, because he's always saying things. And so we can always hear what he's saying. So I just wanted to encourage you guys that God is always moving you towards that person that he wants you to be, and that he's always with you, and that he's never in a rush. Like, that was the biggest thing for me, was thinking I had to be this person, and I wasn't acceptable until I was over here, and just realizing I was acceptable the whole time to him. It didn't really matter if other people thought I was. It was only about what he thought. And I just hope that you guys got some tools out of this. I feel like I kind of go all over the place. I learned so many things, and I just kind of want to just give away everything that he taught me. So I'm just going to pray for you, and hopefully you receive it all. Yeah, Jesus, I just thank you so much for what you're doing. I thank you that you're so faithful, you're so patient, you're so loving, you're always comforting us, you're always guiding us into safety. Yeah, I just pray that each person here would feel your presence like they've never felt before. Yeah, they would just experience your love in a way they've never felt before. You would put your finger on any situation that they are feeling is really, really difficult, that maybe they can't face it or they can't get through it. I just pray you would put your finger on it and give them hope today. Yeah, you would give them vision for what's going to happen once they're past this. Yeah, having a vision for something beyond what you're facing is so powerful. I just encourage you to maybe look back over your prophetic words, or just ask him what he thinks about you, because he's already given you keys to get through where you're at right now. And that doesn't mean it's going to go away. It just means that he is speaking to you about your future. And it's really good. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.